One of our last topics in this chapter is what we call measures of central tendency, which you probably have called in the past averages, right? Now, this word central is key here, okay? Because what these different measures of central tendency generally do is they generally give us different ways to measure the center of a set of data. Now, what do you think of as the center? I mean, it's up for debate, really, right? And that's why there's three different measures that are all called measures of central tendency. So we have the mean, right, which is the one that you usually refer to as average, right? And how do you find a mean or an average? You basically add up the values and then you divide by how many you have. Okay? So what happens is that little symbol there, that means sum. It's the Greek letter sigma. So you would read this as sigma x, which means the sum of the x's, divided by n, right? Which is how many there are, right? However many x's there were, you divided by that number, okay? So you add up all the data. So that means sum of the data divided by how many there were. So that's the mean or the average, which I think most of you probably have seen, right? And then we have the median, which is sometimes also referred to as the 50th percentile. And the median is the value in the middle if the data is arranged from smallest to largest or largest to smallest. You could arrange it either way, and the value that's in the middle is always going to be the median. Now, if there is no middle value, then the median is the mean of the two values closest to the middle. So we'll look at that in an example in a second, right? And then, of course, the mode, right? Because mode means like style. What's the fashionable one? What's the one that's in style? That's the one that occurs the most frequently. Okay, so the mode is the one that occurs most frequently. And again, the thing to note with mode is there may be no mode, right? If nothing repeats, or there may be more than one mode, right? Like maybe you have like five of two different things, right? And then there would be more than one mode. So with the mean and the median, you'll always be able to find it, but with the mode, there might not be one. So we'll start with a set of data here. We have the number of children in different families. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So n, right, equals 18, right? There's 18 pieces of data. So if we're going to find the mean of these, right, what we can do is we can add them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? So there's 9 ones, so that's 9 plus 1, 2, 3 twos, so that's 6, plus 1, 2 threes, that's another 6, plus 4, plus 5, plus 7, plus 8. So you see what I did is I grouped all the ones that were the same together. They were 9 ones. That's where I got my 9 from. There were 3 twos. That's where I got my 6 from. And there were 2 threes. That's where I got my other 6 from, right? I did 3 times 2. I did 2 times 3. And I did 9 times 1. And then I would divide by how many there were, which is 18. So when I do this, this becomes 21, 25, 30, 37, 45 divided by 18. And again, you could do that on the calculator. And when I divide this now, 45 divided by 18, I'm going to get 2.5. And generally, yes, the unwritten rule, or it might be written, I don't know, is that if the data is to the nearest 1, you can actually round your mean to the nearest tenth, right? You can go one decimal place more, right? So if my data is in tenths, I can round to the hundredths for my mean. If the data is in the thousandths, I can round to the 10,000ths with my mean, so on and so forth, right? So here it was to the nearest 1, right? They were all whole numbers, so I could round to the tenth. So that was my mean. Now my median in this case, this is going to be one of those situations that I talked about earlier where there's going to be no middle, right? Because if we look at this, there's 18 pieces of data. There's no middle, right? Because there's an even number. So we would actually have 8 numbers on the left, 8 numbers on the right, and then you see these are the two that are closest to the middle. So what we want to do for the median in this case is we want to take the mean of the two that are closest to the middle, which is 1 and 2. So what's the mean of 1 and 2? I would do 1 plus 2 divided by 2, and I would get 3 over 2, so I would get 1.5. So the median in this case is actually going to be 1.5 because there is no actual middle number, right? There's two that are closest to the middle. So that's my median, and my mode is just going to be, well, I had a bunch of ones, right? There were 9 ones, right? So that's the one that appears most frequently. So my mode is going to be 1 because there were 9 of those, right? So in this case, if I wanted to describe the center of the data, I would probably use the mode and say that it's 1, right? Partially because it's impossible to have 2.5 children and it's impossible to have 1.5 children. So I think in this case, the 1 makes sense because by far, um, most of these families had 1 children in them. So that's why I would say the mode is probably the best here to use. Okay. And then you do the similar thing with the salaries of employees, right, in the company. And that's measured in thousands. So if I wanted to do the mean here, this I'm probably going to use the calculator for, right? I would add them all up. So I would do 20 plus 20 plus 30 and so on. And I get 1,160, and then I would divide it by how many there are. And in this case, there's 12, it looks like. Divide by 12. So 96.7. See, in this case, this one I was actually in the I was really to the nearest tenth all these values. So in this case, I actually could go to the nearest tenth, I'm sorry, the nearest 10 and say that this is not really 96. I'll round it to the tens. Or no, actually the ones, right? Because these are all to the tens. So I could round my mean to the ones. So I could say that this is 97. So my mean is 97, right? Because all of these values were to the nearest 10, so I can round my mean to the nearest 1. So I'll say 97. All right, so that's 97,000 it really means, right? It's not $97, it's $97,000. So that's my mean, and then my median, again, this is going to be another one of those scenarios. There's 12, right? So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the left. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the right, and then I have 50 and 70. So my median is going to be the average or the mean of the two that are in the middle. So it's 120 over 2, which is 60. So my median is going to be 60. And then in this case, the mode, the one that occurs the most frequently, 20, 20, 30, 30, 40, 50, 70, 100, 150, 200, 200, and 250. Well, actually, this is a weird one because there's two 20s, there's two 30s, and there's two 200s, and there's nothing that appears more than twice. So in this case, the mode is actually all three of those. So it's 20, 30, and 200. So this is what you would call trimodal because there's 3 different modes. All right. So in this case, I would probably say that maybe the mean is probably a pretty good measure in this case of the center because it's pretty well spread out, all those salaries. So I would say 97 is probably a good number to use to represent the center. All right. And then the last one, you can practice that on your own, and I'll just show the answers in a second. So in this case, the mean came out to be 379. I mean, it was actually 378.8, but we can go to the nearest one here. So the mean was 379, the median was 250, and the mode was 250 and 300, right? Because there were 2 of each of those. and there was nothing else that repeated more than one that repeated. So the mode is 250 and 300. And in this case, I would say the median is probably the best measure, because the problem with this one is that 1000 and that 1500 make the mean way larger than it probably should be. So, those are what we might call outliers. So probably the median is the best measure here, or the mode, but they were two different ones. So if you want just a single measure, it's probably best to just use the median in this case.